On today's episode.
When you don't yourself, for instance, the parent in one of these situations, when you don't yourself have someone outside of yourself to rely on, you can think of, well, this is somebody who's got my back. This is someone who's going to make promises and keep them and everything like that. Meaning, if you don't have faith in God, then the pressure that you feel, the burden of responsibility, taking care of this child, is going to weigh on you that much more heavily, and because you don't have hope for the future, you don't have a sense of, well, God's going to lead me to the right decision here, or anything like that. And not excusing, but you can understand how overwhelming that can be, and how you can convince yourself then that, no, I think what's best for Johnny is that we terminate his life. Welcome to the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. Our world today presents people with complicated issues of life and death, marriage and family, health and science. It can be a struggle to understand or deal with them. We're here to help by bringing good information and a fresh biblical perspective to these matters and more. Join us now for Life Challenges.
Hi, and welcome back. I'm Krista Potratz, and I'm here today with Pastors Bob Fleischman and Jeff Samuelson. And today we are going to talk about our current events for the month of August. Like always, there is a lot going on in the news, and we're going to start with one article that Bob had found from the story comes from the Netherlands about an under 12 assisted suicide in the Netherlands. Bob, can you tell us a little bit about this article?
For a number of years, the Netherlands has led the world in its advocacy and permission for euthanasia or assisted suicide. And then they kind of dug in deeper with what was called the Groningen Protocol, which was basically a formula that was established that families can determine whether a newborn child could be terminated if it didn't live up to certain criteria. Well, then that is expanded now to up until the age of 12. So when this story came out, I dug into it and I found the actual report, medical report. It was written in Dutch, and even though I have a Dutch mother, I let AI translate it for me. But it was a very sobering report, and it hardly talked about the one instance. It isn't like we're going to know what the boy had or anything like that. It doesn't get into that, which is ironic because this committee has a very broad responsibility. They're supposed to review all late-term abortions, all infanticide, and all assisted suicides up until age 12. And so for the report for 2025 actually said that we had 3 late-term abortions, all of which occurred at 30 weeks or later in the pregnancy. They had no infanticides, and then they had this one assisted suicide under the age of 12. And they break the report down for each case by kind of talking a little bit about what was going on. All 3 of the cases for the late-term abortions were of brain damage, some sort of significant brain damage. And then they would talk about the prognosis, how the child would be expected to continue in life. Then they actually had a section, and this is especially concerning, talking about the parents and the burden this is on the parents. And then finally, did the doctor follow the right protocol? Did he bring in a third party? Interestingly enough, for the assisted suicide, the third party consult is not necessary, only for the late-term abortions. So that's what it is. It's kind of a it's got this really eerie feeling when you read the report. It's about a dozen pages. When you read the report, they kind of come down and say, this child would just not have a productive life. They weren't talking about if we allow the pregnancy to go to term or are they going to die tomorrow. They always talked about, well, if we allow them to continue living, it's just going to be a burden it'll be a burden for them. It'll be a burden for their family. And then, of course, the implication is it's a burden for society.
One of the things in the article that you shared that just really jumped out at me is talking about the legislation that allowed this. And, to a certain extent, this is a journalist's language, but the child's parents, treating physician, and an independent doctor, as well as the child, if possible, must consent to euthanasia to meet the law's requirements, according to the report. The as well as the child, if possible, implies that sometimes the child is not going to be consenting, which kind of messes with that whole idea of suicide, doesn't it? And it just makes it straight out euthanasia. It's basically then somebody else deciding this child's life isn't worth living, and so we're going to take it.
I think too, I mean, with this, it, there's just something sad about hearing 12-year-old or under 12. It hits you different. It does. And I mean, of course, it's so sad to hear about it happening to the elderly. And then, we've heard some stories too about, okay, maybe somebody who is older or maybe not even that old, maybe like 40s or 50s are doing this, or somebody in their 20s or 30s. And then you see under 12. And that just, I mean, it does really make you think, man, I mean, does this kid have no chance with his parents or society not helping him? What is going on here? Is this something that is going to happen here in the U.S.? It just hits me so hard in so many different ways. So
I think it has to do with dependence too. Mm-hmm. That child depends on you.
Right.
And especially if you compound that dependence by some sort of anomaly, something that's not right, either cognitively or physically. And so they really depend on you. So every day they look to you knowing you will provide them their food. Every day you will help them toilet. Every day you will help them clean. And then all of a sudden you're looking at them, and tomorrow I won't be looking at you because your days are done. When you've allowed to no longer see in every human being the image of God, of its creator, it's amazing because that line becomes very blurry as to who lives and who dies.
And when you don't yourself, for instance, the parent in one of these situations, when you don't yourself have someone outside of yourself to rely on, you can think of, well, this is somebody who's got my back. This is someone who's going to make promises and keep them and everything like that. Meaning, if you don't have faith in God, then the pressure that you feel, the burden of responsibility taking care of this child is going to weigh on you that much more heavily. And because you don't have hope for the future. You don't have a sense of, well, God's going to lead me to the right decision here or anything like that. And not excusing, but you can understand how overwhelming that can be, and how you can convince yourself then that, no, I think what's best for Johnny is that we terminate his life.
Yeah.
Terribly sad.
Well, we're going to switch gears and talk about something maybe a little happier. In Australia, I believe it was in Australia, there was naturally conceived quadruplets that were born, and they were identical, which is, I believe, extremely rare. Bob, can you share us a little bit about this story?
Okay, I'm just going to impress you with the words I know.
Okay, thank you.
These were monozygotic, and they were hold it. Now I'm blowing it. Monochorionic. Monochorionic. But what I'm saying is that they're identical twins. First of all, the chances of identical quadruplets is like, they say 1 out of every 15 million pregnancies. The chance of them being monochorionic, which is from the same placenta, is unmeasurable. I mean, it's like they are keeping those records. It's even rare for twins and triplets and so forth. So this is pretty remarkable. I also thought that it was an interesting story that they weren't really looking to get pregnant. They did not use anything artificial. It just happened. And how many children did they have already?
4.
So they already had 4. So they doubled the family. I was helping Diane out this morning, and I just mentioned that we were going to be talking about this story. And even Diane went, 8. We have 8, but not at the same time. It's 4 all of a sudden. So, yeah, it's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
At least they had a few months to adjust to the idea of it.
it's cool, right?
Yeah.
It just is really neat.
And they went to 28 weeks gestation when they did the delivery. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyway, just a nice kind of happy story there.
to follow that miserable first
Yeah,
story.
that's right. That's right. Well, also wanted to talk about which we've to have touched on this before too, about longevity and people wanting to stay alive as long as they possibly can. Bob, you had found an article too about how I think scientists now think that the max age that you could even live to with your body would be 156. Which
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, and that was even, there was like a range, I think, too. They said maybe a rough range of 146 to 194, but now they have decided, landed on this 156 with how long you could live.
Yeah, it especially lands on the radar because everyone's concerned about longevity nowadays. There's a lot of discussion on can we extend the lifespan, and basically the core of the research was you can swap out different organs and so forth, but there are two kinds of things that work. There's neurons, and then there are our cardiac cells. And even though there is a certain degree of regeneration that occurs, but it's a very small level, it can't keep up. And so they're just basically saying that between brain cells and heart cells, you max out. 156 is the happy medium. I used to always, I remember back, I don't know, Jeff, when you were on the board and we talked about the flood and the 120 years, we always say that kind of our traditional view of Genesis 6:3 is, where he says, God says, I'm going to give him 120 years. We kind of viewed it as a lead time while Noah built a ark and the world came to an end. But it's vague enough that sometimes it just kind of said we're kind of topping out. That because if you recall, after the flood, all of a sudden the life expectancy dropped dramatically. Nobody was living to be 700-800 years old anymore.
Life expectancy also dropped pretty drastically with the flood itself.
Yes, it did for many people.
It's funny too because I mean, anybody who's older than me is gonna roll their eyes and be like, "Oh, Christy, you don't even know anything." But I mean, when I entered my 40s, I mean, my body is going downhill. It just really is. It feels like that. I mean, my eyesight is going, my hair is gray. It takes me like longer to recover when I get injured from things. I would only want to live to like 156 if I could be in my 20s for 4 decades more. It's just really hard to imagine wanting to be alive and be older when already it's getting a lot harder than it was.
I think I may have mentioned there's a story from Greek mythology about somebody who was given the ability to wish for anything from the gods or whatever, and he asked for eternal life, and he should have asked for eternal youth.
Yeah,
and he ends up shriveled up like a grasshopper or something like that. But yeah, it's interesting that I'm always reminded when longevity questions come up of Psalm 90. Moses wrote, "The days of our lives add up to 70 years or 80 years if we are strong. Yet the best of them are trouble and sorrow, for they disappear quickly and we fly away." It's interesting that Moses wrote that because he lived to 120. Deuteronomy says that he was actually still in pretty good shape when God decided it was his time to take him. So sometimes Christians have pointed to Psalm 90 there and said, well, that's all we should expect. That's our limit, the 70 or 80 years. And that's just a description. It's not a prescriptive kind of thing. But at the same time, I can recall reading things in the last 10 years or so that have said, from people who watch this, that 120 years, that's pretty much the limit. Some people will go, but even with all the various advances that we're making, that's about it. But as you were saying, if you're going to live to 120, you're going to want to be in really good shape at least until you're 100. So, and so, which, I mean, but how much of it is mindset? You do wonder about that. If you hit 60 and you say, oh man, I'm almost, just a step away from the grave, or you hit 75 and you say, well, I guess it's time for me to slow down. It's normal that my brain isn't functioning the way it should or whatever. But if on the other hand, you're thinking, okay, I'm 70 years old. I still got another 50 years left. What do I do to make sure that maximize that, and,
Yeah.
the things that I don't just take for granted as, as in terms of decline, what can I do about that? Are there supplements I can take, exercise, or whatever it might be. I guess that's the really positive thing to take from this kind of discussion is just like, don't take it for granted that you are in a state of decay. You might find by the time you hit 90 that they can keep you alive to 120. So make sure that you're taking care of yourself now so that those extra 30 years aren't troublesome for you.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the great increase on life expectancy really is because of discoveries made at the beginning of life, helping women survive pregnancies, more live deliveries, and so forth. There actually was a story that came out this morning about the astounding rise in high blood pressure in pregnant mothers over the last few years. That's alarming. And we've seen that. We've had problems even at our home for mothers where a lot of the mothers would deliver and they'd be wrestling with high blood pressure. It's something that the medical community want to get on top of because that also is why there's a lot of maternal deaths. But the one last thing I want to just say on this is most of the senior people that I've talked to will tell me, even before they talk about the mobility issue, the arthritis issue, even cognitive issues, they'll complain about all of my friends are gone. They talk about outliving them, and then you get a few who outlive their children, and that's always pretty painful.
Mm-hmm. Another story that we have that really ties in with that is a biohacker called Brian Johnson, who claims that he has created a newborn clone of himself. So he is self-cloned, and I believe this is so that he can harvest organs as he needs them. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. And actually, the most entertaining part, it was a post he had on X. And so I went down and I started reading the comments because guys can be pretty sarcastic in the comments. And one guy said, "Why don't we preserve the clone and harvest your organs?" And I mean, it just, but I mean, you get that kind of bitterness because clearly you would think anybody with any type of ethical foundation at all sees a problem here. But, we've always been playing in this arena to some degree. There's been movies about that, and there have been stories. I remember writing on it 25 or 30 years ago where a couple, they actually reversed a vasectomy so that they could have another child because it raised the questions of the new child not being able to consent to, and it was a blood transfusion and that kind of stuff. But it raised those issues. So now you've got the technology, and we've talked about doing this with biological, where they create scaffolding and they biologically recreate windpipes, and they're talking about being able to replicate organs and so forth. I think everyone knows, so it'd be even easier if you just had a person that, you've got 2 kidneys, give me that one. And then what do you do with the last kidney? And then, of course, if somebody who has just 1 kidney, you get any kind of infection, and now your life is at risk. And it's a Pandora's box. This guy has been pushing the limit for years, but it also raises the interesting question, what happens when you don't govern this, when you don't regulate it? Then everybody can do it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things in reading the article, this Brian Johnson is overselling what he's actually done. He talks about it, I've got a newborn. It's like, no, he doesn't. He's got some cells growing in a petri dish.
I was about to say, yes, when he said he had a newborn.
Yeah. And so in that sense, you're like, okay, so this is not as big a deal as he's making it out to be. In theory, there is an ethically sound way to proceed with this. I mean, if you can figure out, and science and medicine are already working on this kind of thing to try to figure out a way to grow replacement organs. If you can do that, what a wonderful thing that will be. You don't have to worry about transplants. You don't have to worry about rejection of, things like that. Just be a wonderful thing. And that's the direction this is going. But if it's taken to the extreme, which somebody would undoubtedly try to do, of creating a whole new organism, of a human, then it gets a lot more ethically murky.
Yeah. And when you don't value life other than your own, these are the kinds of conclusions people arrive at.
Yep. Well, switching gears here a little bit, we want to talk about the parent divide that no one talks about. This was an article that you had found, Jeff, where it was talking about just I guess, like a difference in mentality when it comes to parenting. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, that's about the difference in the way parents talk about their children, whether they talk about them primarily as blessings or whether they talk about them primarily as burdensome. And yeah, I think for most of us, we hear that and it's like, oh, well, of course it's X or Y. But the article is making the point that there's a political connection to it. It talks more in terms of correlation than causation, but it's generally people who are of a more conservative mindset that are more likely to think of, yeah, there are difficulties, there are problems and things like that that come with having children, but all in all, they're wonderful. I'm happy to have them, and it's such a blessing. Whereas people from a more progressive point of view, when they have kids, tend to be much more of the opinion that, well, being a parent, yeah, it's good, but it's drudgery. And oh boy, the mental load that I carry because I've got to worry about my kids in addition to myself. I just found the article very interesting because it draws this out and applies it to an area where perhaps we're not so used to thinking in terms of a conservative progressive divide on things like this.
I thought it was interesting too. I read the article and was looking a little bit. There was YouTube video links to it, and one was a conversation about a woman talking about homeschooling your children and how there must be really something wrong with those people that do that would like want to be around their children that much.
Often, yeah.
Like, how could they do that? Because she was just so happy to get rid of her children at school or that type of thing. And while I can relate with some of those moments where it is nice to have a break and everything, it did seem really sad too that she just would not think that you would really enjoy or could enjoy being around your children all the time.
There was an undertone to her article. It was an opinion piece she wrote on a blog, and the undertone was that kind of that Christian view of children, having children, has become almost the point of perspective of timidity. Anyone who talks about the beauty of having children and the wonder of having children gets slammed by people on blogs and so forth. And then we tend to just shut down. And then we get off of Facebook or we get off Instagram and we don't participate in that and then of course the culture begins to take on the voices it hears the loudest, which is, the criticism of it. And then you wonder why your sons and daughters well, we're going to wait on having children. And I'm not sure we want children. We might want to wait. And her point is that we don't want to be idealistic about it. We have to recognize there are challenges and middle of the night, getting up for sick children, that kind of stuff. That realistic, but at the same time, the net gain is wonderful. And kind of as a corollary to this, another book I just finished reading this weekend that was dealing with aging is that as a society, we've so drifted away from the family unit, the biblical concept of the family unit, that a lot of families are finding out that as they've gotten into being oldsters, that their children are not around to help care for them or to help them out because their children are not. They either don't have children, they lost the one child they had, or the child they have or the one or two that they had live far away. They're not interested in helping. And that brings a whole new set of issues that begins to drive society where the culture is constantly yelling that if we're going to live for the here and now, these people now really genuinely become burdens.
Yeah, your point earlier, Bob, about the loudest voices in the culture and things like that reminded me of, I guess, saw it on X a few weeks back, discussion of some more progressive journalist or something was making a point about all the trad wives that they hear about are actually these women who have all sorts of income. They're basically was making the point that they're fakes for the most part. So where are all the women who are showing that this is actually like a viable lifestyle to be living like this? And then somebody replied, it's like, well, they're all too busy being mothers and wives to be posting about it all the time on Instagram. And it's like, oh, well, yeah. The people who are successful, who are happy to have these kids, to be thinking of them as blessings or whatever, they're generally not the ones who are going all over Facebook or Instagram talking about, well, yeah, this is what I'm doing and this is so great and things like that. And, there's some of them, when it's great when they're doing that. But to think that simply the amount of FaceTime these people get in the media and things like that is somehow indicative of the actual values is, it's something we should be aware of, that it's not really indicative.
I remember when I was reading this, I was thinking about how negativity seems to rise in our culture now. People would be very excited to read the harsh criticism, the pointing out the bad things of it. When Christian mothers talk about the joy of it and everything, it's almost like, yeah, right, okay. It's just not negative. Nobody wants to read about positive. They want to. And so, yeah, I thought she made some really, really good points about the value of just venerating the blessing in parenting.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have time for one more here, so we're going to do our AI corner, where we usually have an AI article here. Jeff, you had found one that talks about the people of faith are finding a new moral guide in AI. Can you describe that article to us?
First of all, I want to do a shout out to either the author of the article or to their editor who put the subtitle on, "Are you there, Claude? It's me, Margaret." Which is, I just thought that was
very clever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting article by David DeSteno. He's a professor of psychology at Northeastern University. And it's basically making the point that, contrary to what you might expect, people who reported higher levels of religious engagement or belief were more likely to view chatbots as possessing moral authority and, as a result, to seek moral guidance from them more frequently. So basically saying that, you might think that it's the people who don't have any kind of moral, religious underpinnings that would be going to the chatbots and saying, so what's right here? Or what should I do about this? And that he's saying it's actually people who have more of a religious mindset that are doing that. And I mean, it's interesting. I'm not looking at his actual data here to be able to evaluate it, but my first instinct when I read the article was that they must be oversampling people who are in the spiritual but not religious camp. That these are people who's like, okay, well, yeah, I'm really spiritual, but since I don't really actually follow any religion in particular, this seems like a good place to get my guidance. But then I thought about it some more, and I wondered if maybe the problem was that they were actually getting a really good-sized sample of Christians who have a strong view on the authority of Scripture, and that the authors of the study didn't quite understand that. Because if a believer asks AI something like, tell me what the Bible has to say about this issue, and then AI gives them an answer saying, well, this is what, the Bible says, about this. They're going to trust that guidance because it's coming from Scripture. They're going to say, well, yeah, just like my pastor will tell me what the Bible has to say. In this case, the chatbot is telling me what the Bible has to say. So the moral authority in that case isn't actually the chatbot's authority. It's Scripture's authority. If I were talking with this gentleman, I would be asking him, did you control for that, or did you take that into consideration? Even if I'm completely off about this, and what he's saying is basically that there are a lot of gullible Christians out there trusting AI for things that they should only be trusting the Lord for, it's another thing we should be paying attention to. Just another one of those cautions with AI to tell people, no, you need to distinguish between the real thing and the artificial thing, and recognize that God and His Word are the real thing, and that's what we should be relying on.
And I think what Jeff is saying there is, it was kind of the one issue that was coming to my mind, and that is, ultimately, we have to ask ourselves, no matter who gives us the advice, whether it's an AI model, or if it's the pastor, or if it's the neighbor, or if it's our parents, our children, whoever gives us the advice, is what is our ultimate objective standard by which we value the advice. Now, I spend a lot of time on AI. I do a lot of debating with AI, trying to understand how people will argue for abortion rights or how they'll argue for trans rights and things like that. That doesn't mean I'm accepting what it's saying. In fact, I get quite combative with it over the way that it talks. But the one thing that did concern me when I read this article was, all of us have got this, and I don't want to overuse a term, but we all have got to some degree a narcissistic side, a side that. So when you seek out an authority, we tend to seek out the authority that most closely agrees with us. I always used to tell people, don't come to me for counseling because I'm free. I'm a pastor. You come to me for counseling. You're not paying. And so you come to me, and then, of course, if I say something that is in line with what you were hoping I was going to say, then I'm brilliant, and then you tell everybody. But if you wanted to move in with your girlfriend and I tell you, well, you got a problem with Scripture, well, then I'm an idiot. That's kind of how it is. And so they'll enter in something into AI, and it gives them a positive feedback and say, well, now I feel like I'm right. Well, maybe even you aren't objective enough, and you have to go to that ultimate authority, like Jeff pointed out, the Bible. And I'll tell you, if you're playing this game with AI and you're asking it about certain moral positions, just say, well, how does that wash with the Bible? And then pursue it a little bit. And then if they'll say, well, it isn't consistent with the Bible, but, it's kind of the growing feeling is that this is accurate, then say, well, wasn't the growing feeling during the 17 and 1800s that slavery was okay? Is that okay then too? Mm-hmm. And that messes it all up. It fails every time. So.
Well, thank you both for this discussion today. And we thank all of our listeners too for joining us. And if you have any questions about any of these articles, please reach out to us at lifechallenges.us. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and we are excited to have you back next time. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. Please consider subscribing to this podcast, giving us a review wherever you access it, and sharing it with friends. We're here to help, so if you have questions on today's topic or other life issues, you can submit them, as well as comments or suggestions for future episodes at lifechallenges.us or email us at podcast@christianliferesources.com. You can find past episodes and other valuable information at lifechallenges.us, so please check it out. For more about our parent organization, please visit christianliferesources.com. May God give you wisdom, love, strength, and peace in Christ for every life challenge.